So I'll leave it at that. I do want to pass the floor now to Her Excellency Ambassador Shelley Rehman, and we look forward to your comments and look forward to the discussion with you.
Well, thank you for that very generous introduction, President Kemp and Director Shuja, members of the audience, friends from the embassy, which I see many of, and others. Thank you for congregating in such critical mass this morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to such important issues here today. You mentioned a couple of things while you were talking, and I'll come to them in the course of our discussion. But I have to warn you that once a journalist and then a politician, come on, it's not going to be easy to separate this mic and me. So this is going to be your challenge this morning. And I'm going to want to address a fair amount, cover a fair amount of ground. And that really means that I am looking at what Shuja it sent me, I think initially as a framework for looking at this relationship, and that was the past, present, and future. Very interesting that I don't see it today in your introduction, but hey, you know, that would be my agenda in any case. And I wanted to say that this is important, and I'm glad you recognize that there is a context to everything, to every relationship that must move forward, and every relationship that must work in the present, because that is what often strips the bilateral relationship of energy, very often the vital resource needed to keep focus and intent the way we need it to be, particularly as we face a number of transitions coming up to 2014 in the region. Now, I know that the immediate impact of the NATO withdrawal is on everyone's mind in Washington. Believe me, it is on everyone's mind in Pakistan as well as the other countries in the region. It may be for different reasons that it is on everyone's mind in my capital. And I think that it is very important to use this opportunity to bridge the gaps that we may be facing in terms of understanding what we are looking for, where we're headed, and what gains we can make as strategic allies together. So really, I think I want to start with a little bit of doing my job, which is the huge challenge of bridging what I like to call the cognitive disconnect between the two countries. I use this term for want of another better one. If someone comes up with one during the course of discussion, please help. I have noticed this coming up more and more of late, not when I was here as a student in the 1980s, perhaps because we have not drifted strategically apart so much as the fact that we have not been speaking to each other. We've been speaking past each other. Now, I think that is a cliche many of the minds in this room are familiar with, so I really won't go into the build up evidence on that count. I think that's very much something that we can all see. I think that it's important to, the reason we need to understand each other better is because we need to work together. And I think the working together bit we'll address as we go along, the whys and the hows. But what worries Pakistan today? What worries Pakistan today is that there is a bandwidth of possibility and policy options between the two countries that we can leverage to achieve a great deal in the region as it transitions. And that transition, as I said, is of great importance to us. We have a clear strategic goal of winning and securing the peace together. This is very important. And I'll come to why. But I do want to spend a little bit of time explaining that we do need to be able to cut some of the pathologies of distrust that have built up over the years. Now, you know, people ask me, why do Pakistanis bring so much baggage, you know, this neuralgia of distrust to the table? It's because, you know, we're looking at the relationship in a 30-year continuum. And it's not as if Pakistanis like memory, you know, hovering over the bilateral table. And favorite phrase that one of my wonderful staffers doesn't like. I think it really hovers over the bilateral table like a tangible ghost. And she asks me why it's a tangible ghost. That's an oxymoron. But really it isn't. Like many hauntings and many fears, it needs to be stood up and addressed and faced very squarely before it is taken out of the room or exercised, if you like. And this particular baggage or ghost that hovers over this relationship repeatedly is, I said, the one of memory, and memory can only be erased or done away with. Baggage can only be put aside if we recommit to a better today and, of course, an even better tomorrow. And that kind of recommitment needs a little bit of rebuilding of the trust that we have lost somewhere in the space. I think more especially over the very troubled year of 2011, and perhaps of course, over the 6 to 7 months that our relationship was critically actually in virtual suspension when I was sent here. Now, let me just say that without going into the abandonment narrative, which is something I want to stay clear of, because there is one in the region. It's not just from Pakistan, it's more from Afghanistan than Pakistan, certainly. There really isn't one anymore in Pakistan, but it does inform how we think about the region. And it's very important that it should inform how we think about the region because, frankly, you know, we're all looking at our last encounter with the United States and, of course, the exit from Afghanistan as a transformative one. The Pakistan I grew up in, and that would be the 50-somethings, I'm 52, so I'm giving this away right now, up front, has seen a very different Pakistan before the 70s and 80s. And, you know, I don't want to say that I divest ourselves of responsibility or agency in what happened as the United States left Afghanistan and the Soviet Union was actually driven out. But, you know, because our own policy calculus was rooted in a very closed state, authoritarian, undemocratic model. So our mistakes indeed were legion, and perhaps so were our policy choices. But I'm telling you that we have made important strides in understanding from the lessons of the past, what I call our strategic lessons learned playbook. Surely every national security establishment's got to have one. Well, believe it or not, we do have one because of the kind of baggage we were left with. And I just have to say here that it's not because we have a peculiar attachment to history or bad baggage that defines our experience. There's little to romanticize over terrain left littered with the toxic backwash of a war. In fact, the guns, drugs, and militancy that surged over into Pakistan as the Soviet Union left, and then the United States, left Pakistan to literally hoover the park alone, if you like. And that was a very, very heavy lift. And this does feed into what we were left to deal with alone, number one, feeds into this, what I call calendar of imminent anxieties. You have timelines, we have a calendar of imminent anxieties approaching as this drawdown happens. I'm not saying that, we're saying that the US presence in Afghanistan has been something that we are investing. We have invested in a partnership. And what we're looking at in terms of making policy for the future and now is, not a pointless deconstruction of the past, but simply making responsible policy choices for the future. And it is my job and responsibility, even if I wasn't ambassador, to be advocating a rethink of how we look at South Asia from Washington. simply because it is important for us to process change together and calibrate resources for the future. This has to be done. If even as a self-motivated policy, the United States wants to be protected from September 11 again. I'm not saying that that will happen from our region. We already are facing down one of the biggest conflicts on our border, and you do know that we have over 150,000 troops facing that down. We have lost 46,000 plus civilians and soldiers and law enforcement officers since the last decade when we joined together. And we are sitting in a situation where we do not want to lose our schoolgirls and school children to this battle anymore. So we want at least some strategic sympathy for what we are facing down in the trenches on the front lines. This does not for 1 minute say that we don't take responsibility for things that have led to some of the situation. No, I'm saying something quite different. I'm saying that the narrative machine in Washington, every capital has its own. Islamabad has its own. Everybody have their own. But the narrative machine in Washington has got to take cognizance of the fact that Pakistan is facing a great deal of shocks on its own, and right now, what is it doing? It's bracing for another surge, which is completely understandable, because if we didn't, we would have learnt nothing from the past. And we are bracing for the surge not with the same policy options that we used last time, 30 years ago, but we are looking at it in a different way. That the new normal between our two countries, as you know, has been reached after a long and difficult and challenging but very important process. And I say important because now it may be more sustainable, more sober, and more defined with transparency, predictability, and trust than in the past, than episodes of ups and downs. And I really don't think it's intellectually, I think it's intellectually lazy for us to use metaphors of marriage and divorce anymore. Let's look at ourselves as two nations with real needs and real responsibilities. And what we need to do is understand that we have come together right now in the present after a very difficult 7-8 months, and before that I said even 2011 was extraordinarily challenging for the relationship, particularly as allies. So as we come together, why I build a little hope into the playbook here, options playbook here, is because it is democracy to democracy. Decisions in Pakistan are not going to be made on one phone call to a dictator. And I'm hesitant to even use the word dictator. It's so Cold War and so last century, and I hope it stays that way. So it's not going to be like that. Maybe that was convenient, and I do have to say we have constant interactions with the United States Congress, and I have to say that Congress has always stood by and supported democracy in Pakistan. That is something we remember. If memory has brought us this one kind of baggage, it brings us another too. We remember that the US Congress and many members of the administration here today or not have supported the long, arduous, difficult struggle for democracy that my mentor and leader and friend Benazir Bhutto, who's not with us, gave her life fighting for. She also gave her life fighting on the same front lines that schoolgirls like Malala are fighting. The fundamental right to an education, the fundamental right to many freedoms that the Pakistan I was born in took for granted. And I'm not saying that we are not responsible for stripping ourselves of those, because we have brought ourselves back to a place where I'm proud to say Pakistan is now in the middle of its first peaceful constitutional transition. We are going to be in a run-up to an election. But even in this difficult time, when domestic politics should be defining every kind of discourse and action we take. We are holding this relationship together. We are not letting domestic politics dictate the agenda. What we are letting the agenda be dictated is public consent. Our policy with the United States is driven and based now in the legitimacy and solid bedrock of public consent, because Parliament debated it, thrashed it, turned it upside down for 7 months. And that ownership was critical to the new normal that we call today, because that is how we can have a longer, sustained, clear-eyed relationship based on realistic expectations from each other. So that is where we build the hope for tomorrow, that it is one democracy speaking to another. And democracy, as you know, often builds buttresses against extremisms of many kinds. I'm not saying that it's the best, it's the ultimate in systems, but you know better than me what democracy serves for people, for strategic policy, for all kinds of public goods that we seek to build together. And I am saying that Pakistan and the United States are now in a position where they can actually sit down and say, how do we rebuild a future for South Asia that is pivoted on the vision that our president has been very diligently pursuing? And you know, we can talk about that more, but which is that we build stakes, constituencies, equities for peace and stability in all of South and Central Asia. Our vision is to hub Pakistan as the center of, you know, progressive, modern, energy-hubbed corridors of trade. Even if the energy hub takes a while, these are all long gestation projects and ambitions, literally, because we are struggling with challenges of infrastructure deficits at home as we speak. But the vision is important in that our policy machine has turned. Maybe the narrative machine will take a little longer. We have no, the media is vibrant, it's actually very, very sometimes fractious, but it's fiercely independent. And I'm one of those people who fought for this right, so what can I say? Many other institutions are autonomous, independent, including the Election Commission of Pakistan, which is now actually nominated and selected and made by bipartisan or multi-partisan consent in Pakistan with weightage in Parliament. The opposition has as much say to how this institution is framed, who is appointed on it, and how it frames the rules of business and ensures a level playing field for this election. And let me inform you here as an aside that the first thing this election commission did, new one, is threw out one of the ruling party's own by-election candidates for being a little rowdy. Women are rowdy at the polling stations, and some of our women. So she was thrown out, just like the men. And we did not contest it. So be it. This is the institution we have created. We are proud to say that we submit to all accountability mechanisms and institutions that are now seeking their equilibrium in the new Pakistan. So this is the new Pakistan. It is seeking to really undergo a huge transition while it's facing down, I would say, one of the biggest blowbacks from conflict in the region. And I say this because I come from a city which is really transformed in the last 30 years. My daughter's Karachi and my Karachi are two totally different things. We have been facing, and one of the things we faced from, again, from the wars next door, and this one has been the longest, so it is understandable that we brace for the surge, is that we have been hosting the world's largest population of refugees. It's a forgotten statistic for the world. But for Pakistanis, it is the here and now. It is the new and current demographic. And it's very real for us. So we are looking at that pivot, that change into the region. as really something that will buttress the new Pakistan into a future based on regional stability, security, and we hope peace and prosperity. Now, we have learned these lessons, and one of the lessons we've learned is no one can broker peace for the Afghans except the Afghans themselves as we go into 2014. This means that we will reach out across the board to all groups. We look forward to assisting, and we have been assisting the United States recently in its attempts to rebuild contacts across the board, and we have been working with Afghanistan and the United States on the path to reconciliation, and we will support all Afghan-led roadmaps to that course. And I say Afghan-led because this is very important. This is the key. If we have learned this, I hope everybody else has learned that. That sometimes that there is no other way of winning the peace than talking. And one of the things I want to say here is that when we do this together, we also hope that the United States is able to preserve some of the very important gains made in the last 10 years in Afghanistan. And one of those should be looking to secure women's rights, among many other freedoms that we can talk about. But, you know, change is in the air. Change is hardwired into this relationship, but it's how we process the change that's important. We don't see our relationship as episodic or built on changing needs, but we see it instead through a more filtered prism of broad, multi-layered attachments, including a strategic goal of winning and securing the peace. Because I have to remind you, in the last war we were together in, the ones that we defeated the Soviet Union together in, we may have won that war together, but I'm very clear, we lost the peace. So I know that Pakistan has learned lessons. I need to understand everybody else has, because we do not have the luxury of walking away from the region. We have to live right there, and there can be no drawdown for Pakistan. Our forces are where they are. We are seeking to build constituencies of peace with India. We are seeking to build trade hubs, refashion a trade agreement with Afghanistan, and we are hoping to build on an infrastructure of trade to further what I call this regional pivot that President Zardari is constantly speaking about, and that really also goes to Central Asia, building the TAPI pipelines, the CASA 1000, many stories that don't get mentioned in obviously Washington headlines. That's of course refracted only through the bullets and bombs kind of prism. And sometimes that gets a little tiresome, because that's not what the country is about, even as we face down that kind of conflict. So, you know, the good news is that the relationship is back, the bilateral relationship is back to a sober and stable, and even I would say upward trajectory. I don't hesitate to say that because, again, it's not in the news. We've had 5 working groups working together on different subjects, like before, energy, nuclear security, law and order, counterterrorism, economy, and many other meetings continue to take place as we rebuild our relationship. And we hope that, you know, the current regional instability, as asked by you, can become an opportunity for our 2 great nations to develop that mutual commitment to act together as a stabilizing force. Pakistan, I can tell you, and I can unequivocally assure you, will act as a regional pivot for stability, but we can only do so if we have the trust and confidence of our allies. And I was asked what are the few things we think we can do, so of course I have a 10-point list which I'll quickly run through, and you know, which Shuja is very familiar with because he does this. This is his day job and mine too. So I just have to say that First of all, I think it's important as we venture forward in stabilizing the region to trust each other. We have to share notes, build communication through formal channels and not the media. We are seeing some progress in this direction. The strategic sympathy bit I have tried to build into all conversations. What I say is try to understand each other's challenges. Don't interpret differences approach as duplicity. Don't confuse capacity issues as lack of will. Do not exacerbate each other's sense of insecurity or anxiety. When we have the schoolgirls like Malala shot by the TTP, who are massing in Kunar, which is the Afghan side of the border, we do not leap to the public conclusion that this was deliberate or planned, notwithstanding the conspiracy theorists sitting everywhere, adding confusion to the fog of this war. We expect the same consideration. We expect all our good meetings to also be reflected out. And I have to say that the administration actually has made a huge effort to bridge some of this gap. Our challenge is to reach out to others now, because the challenge of democracies is to speak to each other's societies, and that is going to be the core challenge of foreign policy for every country in the future. It will be to reach out to each other's societies, not just our states or administrations. And then I suggest that we also do a reality check on the situation in Afghanistan. I've spoken about it a little bit, but we do need to work together to ensure that any kind of transition does not pose greater risks to Afghanistan sinking into instability and economic unsustainability. I think more than a military victory, what the US must now try to ensure is to leave an economic infrastructure that allows the Afghans to build on after the US transition. As I said, after fighting the war, the US must win the peace, and we will work with you on it. And I believe we are every day as we speak. Now, to recognize that the problems in Afghanistan are multidimensional is also important. Pakistan has been making this point since the first year of our US involvement in Afghanistan. Force is, of course, a critical element. It is, however, only one of the options available to people in Afghanistan. And I keep telling myself, don't use the graveyard of empires cliche, do not, but it just bubbles up. What can I do? I'm just a bad diplomat. But yeah, I know that I know the Pakistani press is going to make a headline of that. So, but here we're looking at going forward in a very complex situation, where the talk of doing more really won't help. It's what we can do together that is important, and castigating any one country to shoulder the burden right now is, I don't think that will get us anywhere. It's not a strategic option we should look at, and we should very clearly see where we're going in Afghanistan. As I said, Pakistan's position is very clear. We will support all roadmaps to reconciliation and a negotiated settlement, but we will not play. What we will not do is play favorites in Afghanistan. What we will not do is say or behave in any way that suggests that Afghanistan is our strategic backyard. This is not the new Pakistan, and we are making that very clear by actions and by walking the talk. So for us, a few more things that are important. Again, not on anybody's to-do list, I think, but for us, crucial, and I think crucial for the whole region, is to build in a very robust anti-narcotics element into the NATO ISAF activities. It's still not in the NATO Charter. We've been talking about this for years, because really we're downstream, and I don't want to get into what it's done to the young people of Pakistan, the big demographic that we need to leverage for hope in our future. And unfortunately, a lot of time has been lost in this discourse with very little to show for in terms of interdictions. There's a completely open, porous border with Afghanistan. We have still, even at this point, as compared to NATO ISAF, I would say a 1 to 10 ratio of checkposts, considering we don't have that kind of capacity, but it's our country, we can't walk away, and we do what we can. So if there's about 800 to 900 checkposts on our side, there would be only 100 plus on the NATO ISAF side, which is Afghanistan, of course. So that tells you the asymmetry of the effort being put into many kinds of interdictions, including IED. We are making signal breakthroughs on that. But when we have a discussion, we would like that appreciated. We would like the glass to be seen as half full, not half empty, because we filled that half full glass, no one else. So if you're going to need for us to do stuff together, and I want to say that we are going to do this. We are going to interdict for IEDs and face down terrorism, militancy, extremism on our own, because the fire is in our house. We are bigger victims of IED hits than anyone in the world. So why would we not be doing this? So coming back to that strategic sympathy and maybe more of a heavy lift on the ground. Also remember that narcotics can become another cause for concern in terrorist financing. So if you don't want to add more oxygen to the terrorist resource, then we should be investing together in powerful, secure, and sustainable mechanisms for narcotics interdiction. I know that the Central Asian countries are also looking at this. I know the whole region is concerned and willing to act. And I know Pakistan has been playing a very central role in bringing the region together at the leadership level. Specifically, President Zardari has been constantly conferencing with all the leadership in the region on this. We also want people here, and I'm grateful to our interlocutors in the administration who have shown a great deal of sympathy and understanding since we have been talking, which is over a year now, that you need to know the limits of our capacity and reach in Afghanistan and everywhere. Both sides should understand this. Do not expect us to deliver stability in an arena where 40 countries and billions of dollars and blood and treasure could not. We are not the coalition of the unwilling. We are the ones in that front line taking the hit, and we will continue to do so because this is our challenge. So know that we spend $5 billion a year on defense, while the United States spends 2 weeks just in Afghanistan, $2 billion just in Afghanistan a week. So I'm just giving a bit of perspective here. Pakistan has lost $78 billion to just the last 10 years of our engagement as we face down Al-Qaeda. And I want to say that I am happy to quote senior US officials when they say that Pakistan has been the most important ally in facing down, degrading, destroying, and dismantling the core of Al-Qaeda in the region. So it's been with our cooperation, and I'm not sure it's drones is such a good idea as an instrument to do this, and I'm being very moderate, because this is our view on drones, because you raised it in your build-up, in your talk, in your introduction, is very clear. It's unambiguous. They breach sovereignty. We see them as a breach of international law and our sovereignty, as much as we see terrorists breaching it. But we also think that it has hit diminishing returns for the United States. It is probably adding or more. We see it as activating more terrorists than destroying them now. So I think this is something that more thought needs to be given. It's not just a question of framing laws. It's a question of what gains this is bringing you. I mean, do you really want the next generation, or my daughter's generation, the 20, 30 somethings, thinking of the United States as not building Tarbela Dam or opening up opportunities to Smith College or Harvard, do you really want them to think of the United States as the entity that projects power through drone attacks on 40 television channels every odd night? No, I don't think so. There are other ways to fight terror. And there are other ways to empower sovereign countries to do that. So, this is my point about stabilizing and moderating the US footprint in Pakistan. And then, lastly, I've already said this, it's important to work with the societies and people of our two great nations, expand the opportunities for travel, investment, education. Make trade the highway to our new future. It is important to build ties based on the sustainable currency of trade and business opportunities than only on high points of strategic bonding. We have those. We have our task cut out together in the region to stabilize it. And we have many challenges we are facing alone, and we will face them down. Don't see us only as a function of Afghanistan. Let's build on a common future together. I believe we will need to do that. Pakistan is now host to the third biggest middle class after China and India in Asia. And I can go on about our demographics, our future, the possibilities in Pakistan, but certainly many are opening up just as many challenges are facing us down. So I want to thank you for this time and patience, and I hope I'll be able to answer some of your questions. As Shuja patiently stares at me. So thank you, both of you, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for this.